All right. Well, hello again, everybody. This is Rich Eisen, and you are at the open mic, where I regularly sit down and talk with some of the very best writers in mystery, thriller, and other genres from around the spectrum about their work and how they do what they do. I'm thrilled today to have one of my very favorite authors, one of the most prolific authors you'll know, the many times New York Times bestselling author Jonathan Maberry. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rich. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, look, that pleasure's all mine. Believe me, pleasure is all mine. We're going to get right into it. I want to make the best use of your time, as we'll talk about in a little bit. You're one of the busiest people I know, so let me just jump right into it. Um, your last standalone novel came out last fall, Ink. I know you have many more in the works. Again, we'll talk a little bit about that, but love it, absolutely love it. I remember when you first were doing a little research and asking people about their tattoos. I think I sent you a picture of mine. Um, Tell me more about the book. Tell me, for those who may not have discovered it yet, let's talk a little bit about it.
Well, thanks. Ink is a creepy little standalone that does have ties to some of my other books, but it's not required that you have read any of the others. It stands on its own. It's about a kind of vampiric person who doesn't feed on blood, he feeds on memories. And the way he does that, if you have a tattoo that's tied to a very powerful and important memory, he just brushes it. And the tattoo begins fading from you over a period of time, and it appears on him, and then he can relive those memories. Now, it's not just borrowing the memories, he consumes them, and then they're gone from you completely. So there's one character who has the tattoo of her dead daughter on her hand, and every day she is forgetting more and more of her daughter. And as a result, she will lose the memory of her daughter completely, only left with the knowledge that she's forgotten her child. So it's a pretty terrible type of vampirism, and I had a fantastic time writing. As you mentioned, I did a lot of research. I'm not a tattooed person myself, but I interviewed hundreds of people about their tattoos, why they got them, what the tattoo means, whether that meaning changed at all. What are tattoos that are so personal that they don't show them to anyone else, but it matters that they're on their skin, and so on. And it gave me great insight into it. And also, there's a strong LGBTQ component to the book. And I'm a straight guy, so I did a lot of research by talking to people who are in the LGBTQ world to make sure that I wasn't writing a cliche version of their of a love. Of a romance situation. I didn't want it to be the white guy's cliche version or the straight guy's cliche version of that experience. So the research helps me pack the story with as much reality as possible while still being able to then dive into the uniqueness of whatever that plot's going to be. And Ink is one of my favorite novels that I've done. I think it's my 40th novel, but it's one of the favorites I've ever done.
Yeah, it's absolutely fabulous. You touched on research, and I know how much research you do. And for those who may not be completely familiar with your work, the breadth of your work is one of the really astounding things to me because you write YA comics, standalone horror, multiple thriller series, vampires, the Great Joe Ledger series, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I know since we're not all born with all of the knowledge there is to have in the world, you invest a tremendous amount of time and effort and methodology into making sure, as you say, you get things right. Tell us a little bit about your research habits.
Well, I mean, I was not trained in creative writing. I was trained as a journalist and did magazine feature writing for 20, 30 years as a part-time gig. So I'm used to doing research, and I'm a bit of a research junkie. But one of the things about that, when we think we know something, that's an area that we're not actually an expert in, we make a lot of assumptions about it. Like, we might know something about nuclear energy, or might know something about politics. But when you want to write about it, you want the characters to embody, that world and that perspective. So I reach out to experts. I always talk to a number of experts for any subject. I don't want to have to just rely on what they've published in books and papers, but I want to find out what's current in their field. So when I do the interviews, among the things I ask are, what don't I know enough about your subject to even ask? What assumptions, based on what I've told you about my plot, what assumptions am I making that are wrong? And also, what's the weirdest or coolest thing happening in your field right now? Because that opens up a lot of doors to plot elements that, they're so arcane, so unique to each field of study that there's no way we could know about them. But these guys, that's what they talk about at cocktail parties. So I want those stories too.
Yeah, I love that. I'm sure you're familiar. David Simon, who wrote The Wire and Tremaine,
Of course.
a lot of things. Former, Baltimore Sun crime writer. I love a story he tells about. For those who have seen The Wire, there's a very famous scene when one of the main characters jumps off of the fourth floor of a parking garage to escape some guys that are after him. And later on, somebody asked him about that and said, I mean, that's you know, it wasn't that pushing the limit a little bit or whatever. And he said, well, that is true. I did, change that. He actually jumped off the sixth floor, but I didn't think anybody would ever believe that. So that's one of the things I love about, talking to real people, because I do think sometimes truth is so much stranger than fiction.
It really is. I mean, there are things I learn with every book. There are things I learn that I wind up telling at cocktail parties. That, I mean, these are such great stories. Some make it into the book, and some they don't fit the book, but they're so interesting that they kind of lurk in your head, waiting for a story to come along so you can put it into them, put them into it. And very often when I talk to an expert, they'll say, "Well, this is my area, but I know a guy who knows this," and then I wind up going in all these different side corridors into other experiences, which, when I put them into a book, makes me sound like I'm a lot more educated on these subjects than I am. So if I get it right, it's on them, and I that's really great, and it really matters to readers too, because when you get something wrong and it's an area they know something about, like, for example, if I read a martial arts fight scene, and I've had 57 years in martial arts. Martial arts fight scene, if it's wrong, it kind of spoils a lot of the book. It erodes my suspension of disbelief. But if they get it really right, it intrigues me and draws me further into the story. And that's kind of what I want to do with the research that I do for each book.
Well, as I noted, you write across a lot of genres.
Mhm.
Um, but the thread through all that, of course, is um, the creepy and the horrific, maybe, is the way I would describe it to some extent. I mean, you love vampires and, zombies and werewolves and, just the things that go bump in the night. Why is it so much fun for you? Because you clearly enjoy it. I don't know if I've ever known anybody who enjoys writing that as much as you do. What is it about all of that that is so enjoyable for you?
It's important to know the perspective on it, because people ask me why I write about monsters, but I don't. I write about people who fight monsters. And that's an enjoyable story to constantly tell new versions of all the time. I am not monster centric. I am all about the people who are facing something very big and bad and have to level up in order to be able to deal with it. And even though it's fun now in my career, I mean, the origins aren't as fun, because I grew up as a kid in a very violent, very poor neighborhood. My father was very abusive. And, I got involved in martial arts because I knew at some point I might have to fight him. I might have to stop the cycle of violence. So I kind of leveled up in my own life, and then went on to teach women's self-defense for the physically impaired, for children, and so on, for decades, including at Temple University in Philadelphia. I taught martial arts history, but also women's self-defense as a regular class. So I love stories about people who don't appear to be capable of defeating the big bad, and they certainly don't believe it, but they have to find a way to do it. And those stories, when you empower the hero within your story, even if they take a lot of damage along the way, that's exciting to write, because I do like seeing the bad guys get spanked pretty damn hard.
Well, and one of the other very consistent themes in across all of this work is, somehow in all of this, you keep a tremendous sense of humor, which to me is very indicative of you. You have a great sense of humor, but you've really managed to convey that even in some of these terrible situations that you're, even in a lot of your straight horror stuff. I noticed there's that very consistent theme of, some might say, snark, but it's really, really powerful in the stories. Tell me a little bit about how you use that.
Well, sarcasm is my superpower, that's for sure. It is snark. It is rarely mean-spirited. It's usually a character making a joke because the situation is absurd and because they're tense. And I've been in a lot of crisis situations in the real world. People make jokes all the time. People laugh at funerals. That nervous energy has to come out, and sometimes it comes out as a commentary on what's happening. When you think about a viewing at a funeral, we're all standing around looking at a corpse that's been decorated in a box for presentation. That's really freaky. I mean, as a cultural phenomenon, if you came from a culture that doesn't do that, that just seems weird. So somebody's going to comment on it. And as my sisters and I did at our grandmother's funeral, and we loved our grandmother, but we couldn't stop laughing. So my characters have that humor, that tension relieving humor, but also I like making not mean spirited, but snarky one liners. It's always been a thing of mine. And, characters that are ciphers of me tend to bring along that particular trait, for good or bad.
Right. Well, as I mentioned, you're prolific, um, which, and you noted you were trained as a journalist. Of course, I'm a reporter. I can respect that for sure. Talk a little bit about your work habits, because I know every writer has, every successful writer anyway. The one thing I think, the trait that every great writer has is that they can sit down and write no matter how they feel, right?
Yeah.
How is your particular workday parceled out? Do you have word counts, page counts? What is it that gets you through each day?
Well, to preface it, let me just say that to me, much as I love the artistic and creative parts of writing, it's a job. It is my job. This is what I do every day. So I'm at home. I come into my office every day, usually around 8 to 9 o'clock, and I write. And I take breaks for different things, but I write. It's my job. So I try to get between 3,000 and 4,000 words done per day in raw form, rough draft form. On days when I'm editing, I've got to edit X number of pages per day to make up, to be equivalent. But it's my job. But I also have to budget into that time for contract negotiations. Like we're just this morning we got contracts for a 3-book deal that I'll be co-writing with somebody. That contract came in. I had to review the contract and so on. And that's stuff that is not writing time, but it is business time. I'm doing a series of pitches for a TV series that me and my producing partners are trying to sell. And the writing the deck, the prep time, and all that is all work time that has to be factored into my schedule while still hitting whatever deadlines I have. And I had I had a writing teacher long ago who was a newspaper editor, and he taught us how to work with an editor and how to essentially be an editor. And you don't miss deadlines. You hit that mark. So I have to get my work done every day, and I have to also have time to relax. I have to have time to be with family and other things. So if I look at it as a job rather than mythologizing about waiting for the muse to hit me, put my ass in a chair and write. And if it's not right, I fix it in the rewrite. And that's journalism. Write it quick and dirty, fix it in the rewrite, move on. Well, I applied that to fiction, and it works really, really well.
Right. Well, so you mentioned TV. One of your series of books, V Wars, was adapted for Netflix. It was only on for a season, which was a bummer, but such is Hollywood. You clearly haven't thrown in the towel. As you noted, you have a lot more stuff that you're out there pitching. Talk a little bit about that, about where you're at with some of these projects and what we may or may not see coming up on the big or small screen.
Well, V Wars was a product of bad timing. I mean, it was a very good show with great actors, and it launched right at the beginning of the COVID thing. And a lot of people were in Netflix and other places like, well, do we really want to shove an outbreak pandemic story down the throats of our viewers while this is unfolding? And that didn't help our longevity at Netflix. Though we are planning to shop it again a little later on, but because I have so many IP out, IP are intellectual properties, novels, short stories, nonfiction books, anthologies I've edited. All of that IP is available. So some of it is in, it's been optioned. For those who don't know the difference between an option and a production deal, an option is when a producer or a studio has leased the rights to something so that they can try to sell it to a network or a studio, that the producing studio, production studio. So I have several things under option right now. Like my young adult post-apocalyptic zombie series, Rotten Ruin, is in development at Alcon Entertainment. They're the people who did Blade Runner 2049, Book of Eli. They do the Expanse TV series. Great house. They're on the second draft of a script with one of the Marvel script writers doing the script. Can't really say who yet, you know. I'm also doing a project for them where I may wind up. I'm writing a prequel to something they did a while ago, a movie they did a while ago, and then we may have a TV series out of it. In which case, my book information will overlap with the TV show, so I'll probably be EP on that show, executive producer on the show. I just sold another book yet to write in that series. I've got a short story that was optioned by a producer in Toronto because his daughter had read the story as required reading in school and said, you know, Daddy, can you grab this? So they're trying to develop it into a TV movie, and a bunch of other things. You know, Vin Diesel's reading one of my books right now. You know, we're hoping to grab him for something. So I've got a bunch of stuff in play. There's stuff we're pitching. TV series are pitching, again under non-disclosure agreement, but we're doing a series of studio pitches for it. And I wrote what's called a pitch deck, which is an instrument, PDF now, usually it's print, that tells about the series, has a lot of graphics and so on. And myself and an actor who may be involved as a writer director, and we actually do the pitches ourselves. I mean, so it's us on a Zoom call with, you know, studio heads. And we've done, I think, 14 so far. We've got a whole slew coming up for that and other projects. Hollywood's fun. You know, I still am a novelist by trade, but I'm getting more and more involved in the Hollywood space. And it's one of the reasons I moved to California 7 years ago, by the way, because I was starting to get some interest in things. And, you know, eventually I want to be able to write for film and TV, and don't know if I ever want to be a showrunner, but I definitely want to write for film and TV.
Well, it's certainly I can't think of too many other um, authors who produce stuff that would be as it's as visual when I read it. I will say that. I mean, especially the Joe Ledger series, which I've read almost every one of, I think now, so visual. So of course I have to ask about that one. I know there's probably things you can't say specifics, but is there a chance we're ever going to see Joe Ledger on the big screen or even on the small screen?
There's always a chance. It's been optioned twice, and both times the producers who optioned it put together pitches that, like, one almost got onto ABC, but the then president of ABC, decided he wanted to do the remake of Charlie's Angels instead. So that didn't happen, and we all scratched our heads on that one because Charlie's Angels died real quickly. And then it was optioned again, but the version of the show they were pitching was probably a little too expensive. Because right around that point, some studios are starting to scale back because they're investing so much in new content. They've got to be careful with their money. So they pitch something just too expensive. So right now it's being shopped again. And I'm actually pretty confident we'll wind up with Joe Ledger on either big or little screen. But personally, I'm more of a TV guy because I love the depth of character development in TV.
Sure.
I would love to see TV. But if they want to do a Joe Ledger series of movies, and it is being talked about again by some really cool directors, I would be pleased as punch.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you would be. So would we. You know, when you have this many different um, characters and books and series, uh, do you have one that is your favorite or is the most special to you? Or is that like asking which one of your kids you like the most?
Well, I mean, there are individual books I really love for different reasons, like my standalone space travel novel, Mars One. You know, I really love the research I did. I'm a space junkie. You know, my X-Files novel about Dana Scully as a teenager. I love that because it's the official story now of Dana Scully as a teenager. So each one I love for different reasons. But the character I come back to most often um, is Joe Ledger. I've already written 11 or 12 Joe Ledger books. The 12th, Relentless, will be out in July. I've written, I don't know, 60, 70 short stories about Joe Ledger. The third or fourth short story collection, Secret Missions, will be out this fall. And I've added him to other things. He shows up in my Rotten Ruin series. He shows up in my Dead of Night series. He's my ubiquitous character that if I throw him into any circumstance, he's going to be the one who's likely to survive it, but also be entertaining to write and to read, I hope. So Joe Ledger is my favorite. But there's a character, Monk Addison, who's in Ink and Glimpse and some other short stories, who I've come to really love as a character to write. And I will be doing a lot more with that character as time goes on as well.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I can't wait for all of that stuff to maybe come to fruition. Like I say, I love the Joe Ledger series. I think, there's something about that character, I think, that strikes something in anybody who reads it. And by that I mean he's that classic of the kind of character that men love, but so do women. And it's because he has this basic goodness to him, even though he's a very, very tough individual. I mean, let's face it, his job is to kill people, bad people, but he kills people all the time, him and his crew. And yet there always seems to be a side of him that has this endless well of compassion, even through all of this gruff and this horrible world that he lives in. And I think that's incredibly appealing to a reader, regardless of maybe whatever, even if they don't necessarily like thrillers or horror or whatever. There's something really compelling about that character. I'm going to assume that you know that, but I mean, tell me how you developed that Joe Ledger character.
Joe brings a lot of my own personality in there, though he's thinner, cooler, and funnier than I am, which is weird because he's actually funnier than I am. I've never quite understood how that works. But Joe is a lot of the tough guy fiction tends to be the kill them all, let God sort them out sort of thing, or it's gun porn where it's all about the gun and not about why that person's holding it and who he's going to shoot and what that person's life was. I'm a humanist. I tried to stay away from politics as much as possible. The last 4 years were a challenge, but I'm more of a humanist than anything else. And Joe is too. He doesn't really care, which side of the aisle you're on. It's about right and wrong for him. If you're doing something that hurts the innocent, he's going to be in your face. And it's because he comes from a place of deep damage. He didn't aspire to be a killer or a shooter. He aspired to have a happy life, but a circumstance destroyed the happiness in his life. He and his girlfriend were attacked, and she eventually committed suicide as a result of the psychological repercussions. He was badly damaged. That's why he got involved in martial arts. He is trying to heal the world because he was not able to save his girlfriend. She was abused, and then she eventually committed suicide. Twice he could not save her. So he's trying to save the world, and everyone around him is aware that he's doing damage to himself by trying to save the world, but he'd rather go down swinging than just let the bad guys win. So that's a very relatable thing. Someone who, despite being knocked down repeatedly, keeps getting back up. It's one of the reasons people love Captain America. Every time he gets knocked down, he's like, I can do this all day. And he gets back up and he starts fighting again. It's that kind of a guy. He has no agenda. There's no medals at the end of the day. He just wants the bad guys to stop hurting the good guys.
Right.
He's very compassionate. There's also a thread throughout the entire series about how violence leaves a mark. The violence that he does and the violence he experienced is also changing him. And that's chronicled throughout the series of books. Mm-hmm. It's not just he shoots somebody and in the next scene, there's no reference to the emotional, psychological, or legal repercussions of having to shot someone. What he does always follows him through the stories, and that's more realistic. It's easier to relate with a character that's believable, and there's a lot about him that's believable.
I would be remiss if we didn't touch on how supportive you are and always have been to other writers, and in a couple of different ways. I want to touch first on the Writers Coffee House because that's something I also have been fortunate enough to be involved in. As with everything else over the last year, things that got put on hold, and now I've since relocated to another city from when the chapter I started in the Sacramento area, and now I'm a short ways away. We'll eventually start one here too. But tell me about the inspiration again behind the Writers Coffee House, what it is, what the inspiration is.
Well, the backstory to it is when I was a kid, I was very fortunate enough. It's a longer story than we have time for now, but I was fortunate enough to meet and be mentored by a couple of famous writers, including Ray Bradbury. And one of the things Bradbury told me was his 10 commandments of how to be a great writer. Don't be a jackass. Don't be a jackass. Don't be a jackass, and so on. And but also he believed that writers should help each other because, as he saw it, there were two camps. One camp of writers is the camp where people seem to feel that if they help someone else or give a lead or a tip, that person will get that advantage and you won't, because advantages are finite. And so it's fear based, and you know, I hate that sort of mentality. The other camp is the one where people seem to think that if writers help other writers, more good books will get written. Therefore, there will be more good books to be bought and published and sold, attracting even more readers. It's a win-win situation viewed from any direction. So I started the Writers' Coffee Houses back in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, when I lived there about 20 years ago. And the idea was it's free. It's a 2 to 3 hour session once a month. Now we do them online. And it's writers helping writers, sharing information about the business. And that includes the independent publishing business as well as my area, which is the conventionally published business. Writers are writers are writers. We want to help all writers get into print. And we don't bash each other. We don't critique each other. It's here's news, here's leads. What questions do you have? What challenges do you have? Let's either, those running it may have the answers, or the collective group may have the answer, because everybody has a voice. There's nothing but goodwill that can come out of that. And we have a bunch of them scattered around the country now. Most are inactive because of COVID. Some are coming back. Some, like mine, have gone online. And that's the sort of thing that should happen. Writers should help writers.
Yeah, I know we had a very active group here, and we really enjoyed it. And I think at some point, like I say, we'll be able to get the ball rolling again. Um, I'm always amazed too, because I know I've heard you talk before about the happenstance of having Ray Bradbury as a mentor at the age that you met him. I mean, if ever there was somebody fated to do what you do, it feels like, I mean, getting Ray Bradbury as a mentor. And oh, by the way, he wasn't the only one. Tell everyone else who.
Yeah, it was my middle school librarian was a secretary for two different clubs of professional writers. One that met in Philly, and that was the epic fantasy crowd: Sprague de Camp, Lynn Carter, others when they were in town. And then there was the kind of informal one that met in New York. And we're talking 1970, so it's publishing so lived in New York. Books were launched in New York if you were a big writer. So whichever writers were in town were at these parties hosted by a publisher. And so I got to meet Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson, Harlan Ellison, Lee Brackett, who wrote one of my favorite Westerns, El Dorado. Or did she do, I'm sorry, Rio Bravo. Let's see, who else was there? Harlan Ellison, just tons of people. And it was great. They mentored me. And some kind of a weird thing is Sprague de Camp became a mentor and a friend for quite a few years, up until he died. And it turns out he was the best friend of my wife's grandfather, who was a literary agent, pulp fiction writer, and so an editor. And so I had connections, on a couple of different sides. It seemed like a lot of things were pointing me in one direction. And, Sprague introduced me to Weird Tales magazine as a kid, and now I'm editing Weird Tales magazine. I mean, there's so many freaky connections. I should have one of those boards with the red lines going all to sort it out. But I hate to say fated, but it certainly is my calling. That I got more help along the way than should reasonably be expected. And because of that, I know that it's enriched my life, but also it gives me a happy mission to be able to help other writers as well, because I want everyone to have the same level of fun that I'm having and the same level of success, because I started poor and now I'm not, so I want people to share in that. It's a lot of fun in this particular playground.
Yeah. Well, I only have a couple more, but you mentioned that you have a just an absolute bounty of work coming out in this year. Tell us a little bit about what's on your docket coming up.
Well, first off, my fiction career started only in 2006. So I'm writing my 41st novel since 2006. So I've been putting a lot of product. I just finished the other day my 125th short story. And I am in negotiations for graphic novels. That will be, I think, my 19th and 20th comic book run. So, I have a lot of material, but last year, 2020, I travel a lot to conventions. Last year I was home, isolation. I did 4 novels last year, about a dozen short stories, and a run of comics for called Pandemica, which was also a plague-based thing that I'd written before, but was published last year. This year, I've got at least 4 books to write, probably a 5th novel that will be co-written, and other short stories. And it looks like that's going to be the pattern for the next couple of years, to the point where, weird as it sounds, I've actually had to turn down work. And I never thought I would want to turn down work. But there's literally only so many hours in the day. So what I've been doing, if a project comes at me that I can't handle, in terms of just my sheer schedule, I've tried to either turf it over to a friend of mine to get them their boost, or turn into a collaboration so that I write it with someone else, so that the publisher who wants my name can get my name on the cover, but it's a book that also celebrates another writer and gets them in the forefront. So I'm busy as hell, but I'm playing and I'm having fun doing it. So it's not a complaint. It's just it's certainly, you don't take too many days off doing this.
Well,
But I'm living the
the reason
dream.
why
So,
I appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to me here
oh,
today.
of course.
I will wrap this up with my I have a standard question. I for all of my folks who are kind enough to join me here, with different options, and that is, it's a fun question. I intend for it to be a fun question. I mean for it to be a fun question, and it's my standard, which is, I could put you together with any one of the following 3 people. Which one would you choose? Which single one would you choose, and why? The options I'm going to give you are H.P. Lovecraft, Lovecraft country creator Misha Green, who is from right here in the Sacramento area, or Vlad the Third, better known to many as Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Dracula. Those are some options for you. Those are 3 of them. Who of that trio would you pick to sit down and have a great conversation with if you could?
Probably Lovecraft, for a couple of reasons. One, he's influenced so much of modern fiction. The epic fantasy novel, my first epic fantasy novel I'm writing, has Lovecraftian elements to it. But I would also like to kind of sit down with him with a beer in a quiet corner and see if I could maybe open his heart and mind up a little bit to new views on race, gender, and sexual orientation, because very much product of his time, though that's not an excuse, was a racist, homophobe, and sexist. And there's some psychological elements at play there. He may have been actually gay, but in a forced into the marriage mold, and been so unhappy with it, and maybe embarrassed because of social norms, whatever. I'd like to give him a chance to just be himself and open up a little bit, because I do believe that there is a heart under all that. And explain to him, how people have used his legacy and really grown from it. Everyone from Stephen King to Neil Gaiman has written a Lovecraftian story. And I would like to have a talk with him and see if I could guide him into the 21st century, but also pick his brain too.
Well, that answer is as indicative of, I think, the kind of person and writer you are as anything could be. Because I will say, I know lots of writers of these days, obviously, but I don't know anybody who's as prolific, for sure, but who dedicates as much of their time to, who enjoys what they do as much as you do, and also tries to share all the positives of this life the way you do. And I think I speak for everyone who does get to know you a little bit. That's really appreciated.
Thanks.
So,
nice for you to say.
well, and I lament the loss of the San Diego State Writers Conference. That was one of my favorites, and it was a place we could always get together and hang out for a little bit. So maybe sometime in the future we'll get another opportunity to do that.
I'm sure we will.
Great. Well, I will let you get back to your very, very full schedule. For all those of you out there, please join me again. I have a full list of folks coming up. Great thanks to Jonathan Maberry for taking some time today. And we'll see you next time on the open mic.
Take care. Be good to one another.